Taoiseach, last week I raised the issue of home repossessions and mortgage arrears and the numbers of cases coming before the courts. And we now know that there's been about 7,000 repossession orders lodged in the courts as of January of this year, not to mind the over 8,000 last year. And estimates now that over the next 2 years up to 25,000 family homes could be repossessed. And it's interesting to point out, Taoiseach, that 2/3 of those in arrears are actually in employment, demonstrating a capacity, if the banks would only engage with them, to meet and to come forward with sustainable resolutions. Now, last week we brought forward the Family Home Mortgage Settlement Arrangement Bill, brought forward by my colleague Deputy Micheál McGrath, and it's brought forward in good faith, which would end the situation where the banks have been in the driving seat, where the banks dictate the pace and nature of resolutions because of the Land and Conveyancing Act that you brought in 2013. So to end that and to dilute the power of the banks, we brought in constructive legislation last week. And you said no way that you were not going to change it. And you kept your head in the sand in terms of the enormity of the issue. And then put forward the line that somehow it was the borrower's fault that they weren't engaging, that those in arrears were not engaging with the banks. Now, 2 days later, after you denied that there was any need for any change, the Minister for Finance, after the 200 odd cases in Limerick Court, comes forward and says, well, actually, to be fair to the old banks, they're just getting involved to force people to engage. Well, that was both a dishonest and a detached intervention by the Minister for Finance. The banks aren't bringing people to the courts, Taoiseach, to force them to engage, because as Flack have pointed out, there is no legal aid or remedy available once they get into court. And the only reason they're being brought in there is because property prices are rising, valuations are rising, and the banks can get the money back. And it's a very detached comment by the Minister in terms of the extraordinary anxiety and stress for many ordinary families and couples and women who are brought forward before the courts to have their houses repossessed. And it's growing and growing at an alarming rate, Taoiseach. Now, the Minister said that he would change the legislation and the government would change the personal insolvency legislation, which has only dealt with 199 cases. Can you now confirm, Taoiseach, that the government is now prepared to change the legislation, either the personal insolvency framework or other acts of legislation, to intervene on behalf of those who own family homes and who are facing repossessions?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, I don't accept from you at all the comment that you made that the government blamed the borrowers for the situation that has arisen here. Nor do I accept your assertion that government has kept its head in the sand about these matters. I agreed with the Taoiseach when we set out a scheme of priorities for the remainder of the lifetime of the government since last July, that we would review the personal insolvency legislation and a range of other measures to deal with mortgages in distress, and to reiterate that government have no policy at all in the sense of wanting to see people put out of their homes. But the fact is that there has to be an engagement and a process by which that can happen. Now, we recognise, and government have considered this, and I spoke to the Taoiseach at some length this morning about it, that there are some adjustments necessary to the personal insolvency framework, and they would include, awareness of what the insolvency service is about and the assistance that it can give for those families where a mortgage distress exists. Secondly, an independent audit of the quality of the deals that are recommended by the personal insolvency practitioners. And thirdly, the options that are open to borrowers where insolvency arrangements have been rejected by the creditors, i.e. the banks. And also the supports that are available to families who can't measure or can't even meet the restructured mortgages to meet insolvency arrangements, of which there are a number also. Now, you're aware that 110,000 accounts were in arrears at the end of quarter 14. End of quarter 4 of last year, 2014, and that represented a decline of 26,000 mortgage accounts over the 2014 period. It's also fair to say, Deputy, that of the 100,000 cases that have been restructured, the vast majority of those are meeting the demands and the conditions of the restructured accounts. So I confirmed this morning, as did the Taoiseach, that the government have almost completed its review in regard to these matters, and we will bring forward a number of other measures that will complement the range of options that are there at the moment, so that we can deal with mortgages in distress in April. And that means that government have looked at the workings and the effectiveness of the situation at the moment. We want to see the vast majority of people retain their family homes, and we will bring forward a number of other measures following that review in April next month.
Thank you.
Taoiseach, to be frank with you, it's a meaningless response. You said adjustments, and you named 3 items that are not adjustments. I mean, making people more aware of something isn't changing anything. An independent audit of how poor a system is working isn't changing anything. 199 cases concluded to date. The third point, I couldn't quite understand what you were saying, to be frank. You said options open the bars, and you drifted off into sort of a silent whisper. I mean that sincerely, I just couldn't get it. The third point. I mean, Minister Noonan says the government, he insisted the government is watching the situation very carefully. Government is also watching the way in which the insolvency legislation has been applied. He said the government is very conscious of the policy. And Taoiseach, it was he who said that the banks are using courts to get people to engage with them who haven't engaged. I brought cases before you last week where the couple involved were both working were over 2 years trying to get the bank to engage.
Question, please. Thank you.
And the bank ultimately brought them to the courts without engaging with them. It's an insult to those people when a government minister or a government teacher stands up and says, oh, the only reason you're being brought to the courts is because the banks want to get you to engage, because you haven't really been engaging up to now. That is not the truth, Taoiseach.
Thank you.
There's lots of people out there who've been at their wits' end, responsible people, who want to keep a roof over their children's head, who have been engaging with banks, but the banks have not been engaging with them and have been making no realistic attempt to bring about sustainable resolution. So if you do anything, stop insulting people, Taoiseach.
Thank you.
Stop insulting people who are really going through the trauma and anxiety of these court cases.
Thank you, Deputy.
And for them it's not fun.
Thank you.
It's not some tactical manoeuvre that the Minister likes to imply that the banks are particularly up there. In short, Taoiseach, if you look at all the language that's emanating from government, you're watching this, you're monitoring that, but in essence you're doing absolutely nothing to deal with the escalating problem of mortgage repossessions and mortgage arrears.
Thank you.
I think you were getting desperate.
It's not your question.
As you see the economy beginning to improve, all you're left with to attack are the remnants of the disastrous policy that you followed yourselves. Now, when you say the government have done nothing, we actually have more options on the table for people in mortgage distress than most other countries. And the personal insolvency agency has not been dealing with as many cases as we would like to see. And contrary to your view, I think it's very important that when people are in mortgage distress, that they should know the range of options and assistance that is there for them. I think it's also fair to look at the situation that has arisen, for instance, where people look for credit, and the Credit Review Office gives an independent view of that and has given directions to banks to overturn that. The Minister for Justice of the day brought in an amendment here that when cases would go to court, perhaps there should be the option of having an independent review of the options put forward by the practitioner before a court case situation arises. I think that's something that we have to look at. And also, what are the options that are open to a family where the value of the house is written down to market value and they still can't meet those conditions? Now, these are real life conditions that were created by a government that didn't care. Now, you're down to the 37,000 cases over 720 days. We want to see the vast majority, if we can sort these out. So, far from following your assumption that nothing has been done here, we will bring forward another number of measures to deal with these kinds of cases in the month of April.
Thank you.
And that's designed, Deputy Martin, to help people who in their family homes are having a problem at the moment.
Thank you.
And it all goes back to your own outfit, which didn't give a damn about what they did.